I'm just going to put the post for revolutionary suicide in the Jumbotron. Just give me 1 second. And let me find the PDF real quick. Oh, there it is. All right. So the thread of the other previous spaces, since we're on part 7, is in the Jumbotron, and the PDF should also be in the Jumbotron. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hopefully I can knock out this section today, and so we can move on to other like revolutionary and radical material. I have a long reading list. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. The mobilization of the masses, when it arises out of the war of liberation, introduces into each man's consciousness the ideas of a common cause, of a national destiny, and of a collective history. In the same way, the second phase, that of the building of the nation, is helped on by the existence of this cement which has been mixed with blood and anger. That's Frantz Fanon, a quote from The Wretched of the Earth. This section is called Nomo, and I might be saying that wrong, probably, Swahili for the power of the word. And the section is called Raising Consciousness. The Black Panthers have always emphasized action over rhetoric, but language, the power of the word, in the philosophical sense, is not underestimated in our ideology. We recognize the significance of words in the struggle for liberation, not only in the media and in conversations with people on the block, but in the important area of raising consciousness. Words are another way of defining phenomenon, and the definition of any phenomenon is the first step to controlling it or being controlled by it. When I read Nietzsche, The Will to Power, I learned much from a number of his philosophical insights. This is not to say that I endorse all of Nietzsche, only the many of his ideas have influenced my thinking, because his writing was about concepts of fundamental to all men, and particularly about the meaning of power. Some of his ideas are pertinent to the way Black people live in the United States. They have had a great impact on the development of the Black Panther philosophy. He believed that beyond good and evil is the will to power. In other words, good and evil are labels for phenomena or value judgments. Behind these value judgments is the will to power, which causes man to view phenomenon as good or evil. It is really the will to power that controls our understanding of something and not an inherent quality of good or evil. Man attempts to define phenomena in such a way that they reflect the interests of his own class or group. He gives titles or values to phenomena according to what he sees as beneficial. If it is to his advantage, something is called good. And if it is not beneficial, then it's defined as evil. Nietzsche shows how this reasoning was used by the German ruling circle, which always defined phenomena in terms complementary to the noble class. For example, they used the German word gut, which means godlike or good, to refer to themselves. Nobles were gut. On the other hand, the word villain used to describe, oh, you know what? I'm mispronouncing that word. It's gut, not gut, gut. On the other hand, the word villain used to describe the poor people and serfs who lived outside the great gates of the nobleman's home suggested the opposite. The poor were said to live in the village, a word that comes from the same word, Latin villa, as the term villain. So the ruling class, by the power they possessed, defined themselves as godlike and called the people villains or enemies of the ruling circle. Needless to say, when the poor and common people internalized these ideas, they felt inferior, guilty, and ashamed, while the nobles took their superiority for granted. Thought had been shaped by language. We have seen the same thing in the United States, where over a period of time, the adjective Black became a potent word in which American language, pejorative in every sense. We were made to feel ashamed and guilty because of our biological characteristics, while our oppressors, through their whiteness, felt noble and uplifted. In the past few years, however, it has been only a few years, the rising level of consciousness within our Black communities has led us to redefine ourselves. People once ashamed to be called Black now gladly accept the label, and our biological characteristics are sources of pride. Today we call ourselves Black people and wear natural hairstyles because we have changed the definition of the word Black. This is an example of Nietzsche's theory that beyond good and evil is the will to power. In the early days of the Black Panther, we tried to find ways to make this theory work in the best interest of Black people. Words could be used not only to make Blacks more proud, but to make whites question, even reject concepts they had always unthinkingly accepted. One of our prime needs was a new definition for policeman, a good descriptive word, one the community would accept and use, would not only advance Black consciousness, but in effect control the police by making them see themselves in a new light. We thought up new terms for them. At first, I figured that the reverse of God, dog, would be a good epithet, but it did not catch on. We tried beast, brute, and animal, but none of them captured the essential quality we were trying to convey. One day, while working on the paper, Eldridge showed us a postcard from Beverly Axelrod. On the front was the slogan, "Support your local police." There was a sheriff's star above the phrase, and in the center of the star, a grinning, slobbering pig. It was just what we were looking for. We began to show policemen as pigs in our cartoons, and from time to time used the word. Pig caught on, it entered the language. This was a form of psychological warfare. It raised the consciousness of the people and also inflicted a new consciousness on the ruling circle. If whites and police became caught up in this new awareness, they would soon defect from their own ranks and join us to avoid feelings of guilt and shame. Nietzsche pointed out that this tactic had been used to good effect by the Christians against the Romans. In the beginning, the Christians were weak, but they understood how to make the philosophy of a weak group work for them. By using phrases like, "the meek shall inherit the earth," they imposed a new idea on the Romans, one that gave rise to doubt and led to defections to the new sect. Once Christians stated that the meek shall inherit the earth and won over members, they weakened the strength of those in power. They were to be the victors. People like to be on the winning side. We have seen the same principle work on college campuses in this country. Many white youths now identify with Blacks. The identification is manifested in clothes, rhetoric, and lifestyle. They ain't necessarily a good thing, but let's keep reading. Thus, even though we came to the term pig accidentally, the choice itself was calculated. Pig was perfect for several reasons. First of all, words like swine, hog, sow, and pig have always had unpleasant connotations. The reason for this probably has theological roots, since the pig is considered an unclean animal in Semitic religions. In the English language, well-established pig epithets are numerous. We say that someone eats like a hog, is a filthy swine, and so on. In Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, James Joyce uses swine as a destructive, devouring image when he describes Ireland as an old sow that eats her farrow. So the word pig is traditionally associated with grotesque qualities. The pig in reality is an ugly and offensive animal. It likes to root around in the mud. It makes hideous noises. It does not seem to relate to humans as other animals do. Further, anyone in the Black community can relate to the true characteristics of the pig because most of us come from rural backgrounds and have observed the nature of pigs. Many of the police, too, are hired right out of the South and are familiar with the behavior of pigs. They know exactly what the word implies. To call a policeman a pig conveys the idea of someone who is brutal, gross, and uncaring. Pig has another point in its favor. In racial terms, pig is a neutral word. Many white youths on college campuses began to understand what the police were really like when their heads were broken open during the demonstrations against the draft in the Vietnam War. This broadened the use of the term and served to unify the victims against their oppressors. Even though white youths were not victimized in the same way or to the same extent that we were, they nonetheless became our allies against the police. In this case, the ruling class was not able to set the victims against each other, as the racists in the South had done by setting poor whites against Blacks. Our greatest victory, however, lay in the effect on the police themselves. They did not like to be called pigs. They still do not. Ever since the term came into use, they have conducted a counter campaign by using slogans like "pigs are beautiful" and "wearing pig pins," but their effort has failed. Our message, of course, is that if they do not want to be pigs, then they ought to stop their brutalization of the victims of the world. No slogan will change the people's opinion. A change in behavior is the only thing that will do it. Another expression that helped to raise Black people's consciousness in is all power to the people, an expression that has that has meaning on several levels: political, economic, and metaphysical. It was coined by the Black Panther Party around the same time as PIG and has also gained wide acceptance. When we created it, I had in mind some distinct philosophical goals for the community that many people did not understand. The police and the press wanted everyone to believe that we were nothing more than a bunch of young toughs strutting around with guns in order to shock people. But Bobby and I always had a clear understanding of what we wanted to do. We wanted to give the community a wide variety of needed programs, and so we began in a way that would gain the community's support. At the same time, we saw the necessity of going beyond these first steps. In developing our newspaper, we were working toward our long-range goals of organizing the community around programs that the people would come to believe in strongly. We hoped these programs would come to mean so much that the people would take up guns for defense against any maneuvers by the oppressor. All these programs were aimed at one goal: complete control of the institutions in the community. Every ethnic group has particular needs that they know and understand better than anybody else. Each group is the best judge of how its institutions ought to affect the lives of its members. Throughout American history, ethnic groups like the Irish and Italians have established organizations and institutions within their own communities. When they achieve this political control, they have the power to deal with their problems. Yet, there is still another necessary step. In the Black community, mere control of our own institutions will not automatically solve our problems. For one thing, it is difficult to get enough places of work in the community to produce full employment for Blacks. The most important element in controlling our own institutions would be to organize them into cooperatives, which would end all forms of exploitation. Then the profits or surplus from the cooperatives would be returned to the community, expanding opportunities on all levels and enriching life. Beyond this, our ultimate aim is to have various ethnic communities cooperating in a spirit of mutual aid rather than competing. And this way, all communities would be allied in a common purpose through the major social, economic, and political institutions in the country. This is our long-range objective. Although we are far from realizing it, it is important that the people understand what we want for them and what we are, indeed, their natural rights. Therefore, the slogan, "All power to the people," sums up our goals for Black people, as well as our deep love and commitment to them. All power comes from the people, and all power must ultimately be vested in them. Anything else is theft. Our complete faith in the people is based on our assumptions about what they require and deserve. The first of these is honesty. When it became apparent in the early days that the Black Panthers were a growing force, some people urged us to take either accommodating positions for small gains or a Black line based solely on race rather than economic and social strategy. These people were talking a Black game they did not really believe in, but they saw that the people believed and that the Black line could be used to mobilize them. We resisted. To us, it was both wrong and futile to deceive the people. Eventually, we would have to answer to them. In the metaphysical sense, we base the expression "all power to the people" on the idea of man as God. I have no other God but man, and I firmly believe that man is the highest or chief good. If you are obligated to be true and honest to anyone, it is to your God. And if each man is God, then you must be true to him. If you believe that man is the ultimate being, then you will act according to your belief. Your attitude and behavior towards man is a kind of religion in itself, with high standards of responsibility. It was especially important to me that I explore the Judeo-Christian concept of God, because historically, that concept has had an enormous impact on the lives of Black people in America. Their acceptance of the Judeo-Christian God and religion has always meant submission and an emphasis on the rewards of the life hereafter as relief for the sufferings of the present. Christianity began as a religion for the outcast and oppressed, while the early Christians succeeded in undermining the authority and confidence of their rulers and rising up out of slavery. The Afro-American experience has been just the opposite. Already a people in slavery when Christianity was imposed upon them, the blacks only assumed another burden: the tyranny of the future, the hope of heaven, and the fear of hell. Christianity increased their sense of hopelessness. It also projected the idea of salvation and happiness into the afterlife, where God would reward them for all their suffering on this earth. Justice would come later, in the promised land. The phrase, "all power to the people," was meant to turn this around, to convince Black people that their rewards were due in the present, and it was in their power to create a promised land here and now. The Black Panthers have never intended to turn Black people away from religion. We want to encourage them to change their consciousness of themselves and to be less accepting of the white man's version of God, the God of the downtrodden, the weak, and undeserving. We want them to see themselves as the called and the chosen and the salt of the earth. Even before we coined the phrase, I had long thought about the idea of God. I cannot accept the biblical version. The Bible is too full of contradictions and irrationality. Either you accept it and believe, or you do not. I could not believe. I have arrived at my understanding of what is meant by God through other means, through philosophy, logic, and semantics. My opinion is that the term God belongs to the realms of concepts, that it is dependent upon man for its existence. If God does not exist unless man exists, then man must be here to produce God. It logically follows, then, that man created God, and if the creator is greater than that which is created, then we must hold that man in the highest good. I can understand why man feels the need to create God, particularly in early periods of history when scientific understanding was limited. The phenomenon that man observed around him in the universe sometimes overwhelmed him. He cannot explain or account for them. Therefore, he created something. Therefore, he created something in his mind that was greater than these phenomena. Hey, Isaac, I just saw your text message. I appreciate you volunteering to help. I'm going to finish this section and then you can pick up. I'm going to give you a mic. I really appreciate you. He cannot explain or account for them. Therefore, he created something in his mind that was greater than these phenomena, something that was responsible for the mysteries in nature. But I think that when man clings to the idea of God, whom he has created and placed in the heavens, he actually reduces himself and his own potential. The more he attributes to God, the more inferior he becomes, the less responsible for his own destiny. He says to God, I am weak, but thou art mighty, and therefore accepts things as they are, content to leave the running of the world to a supernatural force greater than himself. This attitude embodies a kind of fatalism, which is inimical to growth and change. On the other hand, the greater man becomes, the less his God will be. None of this means that I am completely hostile to the many beautiful and admirable things about religion. When I speak of certain aspects of society to Black people, the use of religious phraseology flows naturally, and the audience response is genuine. I also read the Bible frequently, not only for its poetry, but also for its wisdom and insight. Still, much of the Bible is madness. I cannot accept, for example, the notion of divine law and responsibility to God. As far as I am concerned, if men are responsible beings, they ought to be responsible to each other. And so, when we say all power to the people, we mean to convey a sense of deep respect and love for the people, and the idea that the people deserve complete truth and honesty. The judgment of history is the judgment of the people. That is the motivating and controlling idea of our very existence. Let me go to the space and I'm going to give you a mic. Should be coming.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
All right.
appreciate you.
No problem, no problem. When I was so this is chapter 23, Crisis, October 28th, 1967. When I was convicted for assaulting Odell Lee in 1964, the court sentenced me to 3 years probation under condition that I first served 6 months in the county jail. After release, I reported regularly to my probation officer, and although the months later we founded the Black Panther Party and began our work in the community. The probation officer was better than average, really pretty nice guy, intelligent and fair, and we got along well. Nonetheless, I was relieved when he told me early in October 1967 that my probation would end on October 27th and parole would begin. One of the requirements of parole was that I avoid some parts of Berkeley. In any case, no more reporting. October 27th was going to be a very special day, and my girlfriend, Laverne Williams, and I agreed we would celebrate the occasion. On the afternoon of October 27th, I was scheduled to speak at a forum on the future of the Black Liberation Movement, sponsored by the Black Students Union of San Francisco State College. Requests for speaking engagements had been coming in frequently since the end of the summer. Sacramento publicly prompted a number of college groups to ask for explanation on our approach to the problems of Blacks. They were also interested in hearing that we were opposed of spontaneous rebellions in Black communities and how we viewed the recent riots in New York and in Detroit. Bobby was in jail, and I was filling as many of these requests as possible, even though I am not very good at talking to large groups, nor do I enjoy it. Abstract and theoretical ideas interest me most, but they lack the radical fire to hold audiences. I went to San Francisco State anyway because I was eager to increase our contacts with Black college students. Sharing the platform with me that afternoon was Dr. Henry Edwards, sociology professor from San Jose State, was organizing the Olympic boycott by Black athletes. That session was particularly challenging because it offered the opportunity for a lively discussion with people who disagreed with me, disagreed with my ideas. Uh, this this was in 1967, just after one of the longest, hottest summers in American history. Students' consciousness had never been higher. I talked about the necessities for Black people to gain control of the institutions in their own communities, eventually transforming them into cooperatives, and of one day working with other ethnic groups to change the system. When I had finished speaking, an informal dialogue began. Almost all the students' questions and criticisms were directed at the Black Panthers' willingness to work in coalition with white groups. We maintained this was possible as long as we controlled these programs, but the students were opposed to working with white groups or, for what matter, almost anyone but Blacks. While this viewpoint was understandable to me, it failed to take in consideration the limitations of our power. We needed allies, and we believed that alliances with young whites, students, and workers were worth the risk. I pointed out that many young whites had suddenly discovered hypocrisy. Their fathers and their forefathers had written and talked brotherhood and democracy while practicing greed, imperialism, and racism. While speaking of the rights of mankind and the equality for all of quote unquote free enterprise, the quote unquote profit system, individualism, and healthy competition, they had plundered the wealth of the world and enslaved Blacks in the United States. Penn, can you take over real quick? I just got to help out my little cousin.
Yeah. Nah, you're good, but I appreciate you for real. It gave me a chance to get some water. White youths now saw through this hypocrisy and were trying to bring about changes through the traditional electoral politics, but reality is impervious to the idealism. These youngsters were discovering what Blacks knew in their bones, that the military-industrial complex was practically invincible and had in fact created a police state which rendered idealism powerless to change anything. This led to disillusionment with their parents and the American power structure. At that point of disillusionment, they began to identify with the oppressed people of the world. When the Black Panthers saw this trend developing, we understood their dissatisfaction could help our cause. In a few years' time, almost half of the American population would be composed of young people. If we developed strong and meaningful alliances with white youth, they would support our goals and work against the establishment. Everywhere I went in 1967, I was vehemently attacked by Black students for this position. Sorry, I'm childish. Few could present opposing objective evidence to support their criticisms. The reaction was emotional. All white people were devils. Amen. They wanted nothing to do with them. I agreed that some white people could act like devils, but we could not blind ourselves to a common humanity. All right. More important was how to control the situation to our advantage. These questions would not be answered overnight or in a decade. And in time, and again, these questions would not be answered overnight or in a decade. And time and again, the students and I went for hours getting nowhere. We talked right past each other. The racism that dominated their lives had come between us, and rational analysis was the victim. When I left San Francisco that afternoon, I reflected that many of the students who were supposedly learning how to analyze and understand phenomenon were in fact caught up in the same predicament as the prisoners in Plato's cave allegory. Even though they were in college, they were still prisoners in the cave of exploitation and racism that Black people have been subjected to for centuries. Far from preparing them to deal with reality, college kept their intellects in chains. That afternoon, I felt even more strongly that the party would have to develop a program to implement point 5 of our program, a true education for our people. When I returned home around 6:30, I had a happy, righteous dinner of mustard greens and cornbread with my family. We discussed the college students and their attitudes and how difficult it had been to get through to them. That was our last meal together as a family for 33 months. But I had no premonition of this when I left the house and set out on foot for Laverne's. The friends with me at San Francisco State had taken the car after driving me home. On the way, I planned our evening together and thought about some of the things I might do now that I can take the next. Oh, okay. Cool, Isaac. I saw it. Appreciate you. Let's see. I had no premonitions. On the way, I planned our evening together and thought about some of the things I might do now that I no longer had to report to my probation officer. At Laverne's house, I found to my disappointment that she was ill and did not feel like going out. Although I wanted to stay with her, she insisted that I take her car and celebrate. She knew how much it meant to me that probation was over. By this time, it was getting late, close to 10, so I decided to visit a few my favorite places. I'm going to read this page, Isaac, and you can read the next page where it starts where I made no reply. So I'm going to knock this one out. Nothing about my movements that evening was out of the ordinary. I went first to the Bonson's Locker, the bar where I had started recruiting. Most of the people there were close or casual friends, and I talked, discussing my new freedom and celebrating with a liberation drink, Cuba Libre, a rum, and Coke. From there, I went to nearby church where a social was in full swing. Every Wednesday night, this church held an Afro history class, and on Friday nights, a well-attended social with dancing and punch. I had one more place to go, a party be given by friends on San Pablo Street in Oakland. About 2 a.m., when the social was ending, I set out for the party with Jean McKinney, a friend I had known since grammar school. By now, it was October 28th. I was officially a free man and feeling great. Even though the food was gone by the time we got to San Pablo Street, I did not mind. It was good to mingle with the people and talk about the Black Panthers and answer their questions. We stayed until the very end, 4 a.m. Then Gene McKinney and I headed for 7th Street, the center of the action for West Oakland. There are a number of bars and soul food restaurants on that street, a few nightclubs, and at almost any hour you can find something going on. Some of the restaurants serve up barbecue, and it's really saying something. Gene and I are very hungry, and 7th Street is a place to get righteous soul food. As I turned into 7th Street, looking for a parking place, I saw the red light of a police car in my rearview mirror. I had not realized that I was being trailed by a policeman, and my initial reaction was, here we go again, more harassment. But having been stopped so many times before, I was ready. The police had a list of the licenses on cars Black Panthers frequently use, so we always expected this. I kept my law book between the bucket seats, and I knew that once I began to read the law to the law enforcer, in quotes, we would have to let me go. I wondered what his excuse would be this time. I had obeyed all the traffic regulations. I pulled the car over to the curb. The police officer stopped behind me, remaining in his car for a minute or so. Then he got out and came up to my window. When he got a good look at me, he stuck his head in the window within 6 inches of my face and said very sarcastically, well, 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 what do we have here? The great, great, great Huey P. Newton. Fucking pig. You can go, Isaac.
Sorry, I was laughing when you said that. Okay, so I made no reply, but merely looked at him in the eye. He acted like a fisherman who had just landed a prize catch he had never dreamed of landing. Then he asked for my driver's license, which I had gave to him. Quote unquote, why does the car belong to? Who does the car belong to? He asked. I told him. Give me 1 second. Sorry. It belonged to Miss Laverne Williams, and showed him the registration. After comparing it with the license, he gave me the license back and went to his car with the registration. While I sat in the car waiting for him to finish, another police officer pulled up behind the first one. This is how police officers act, by the way. They get inferior and scared, so they got to call backup, and in most cases it comes in like 3 4 fucking cop cars with 2 people, the max, in them. This was not unusual. I attached little significance to it. The second officer walked up to the first officer's car and then talked for a moment. Then the second officer came to my window and said, Mr. Williams, do you have any further identification? I said, what do you mean, Mr. Williams? My name is Huey P. Newton, and I have already shown my driver's license to the first officer. He just looked at me, nodding his head, and then said, yes, I know who you are. I knew they both recognized me because my picture and name were known everywhere, known to every officer in Oakland, as were Bobby's and most of the other Black Panthers. The first officer then came back to my car, opened the door, and ordered me out, while the second officer walked around the passenger side and told Gene McKinney to get out. Then walked Gene to the street side of the car. Meanwhile, I picked up my law book from between the seats and started to get out. I thought it was my criminal evidence book, which covers laws dealing with reasonable cause for arrest and the search and seizure laws. If necessary, I intended to read the law to this policeman, as I had done so many times in the past. However, I had mistakenly picked up my criminal law book, which looks exactly like the other one. I got out of the car with the book in my hand and asked the officers if I was under arrest. He said, "No, you're not under arrest. Just lean on the car." I leaned on top of the car, a Volkswagen, with both hands on my law book while the officer searched me. He did it in a manner intended to be degrading, pulling out my shirt tail, running his hands over my body, and then he pat searched my legs, bringing his hands up into my genitals. These motherfuckers are sick. Genital area. He was both disgusting and thorough. All this time, the four of us were in the streets. The second officer with Gene McKinney, I could not see what they were doing. The officer then told me to go to the back of his car because he wanted to talk to me. Talking or taking my left arm into his right hand, he began walking, or rather pushing me towards his car. But when we reached it, he kept going until we had reached the back door of the second police car, where he brought me to an abrupt halt. At this, I opened my law book and said, "You have no reasonable cause to arrest me." The officer was to my left, just slightly behind me. As I was opening the book, he snarled, "You can take that book and shove it up your shove it." I'm not gonna say that word. Gonna shove it
Good.
up your ass. With that, he stepped slightly in front of me, brought his left hand up into my face, hooking me with a smear that was not direct and not a direct blow, but more likely solid, straight armed. This momentarily dazed me, and I stumbled back 4 or 5 feet and went down on one knee. He still holding onto the book. As I started to rise, I saw the officer draw his service revolver, pointed it at me, and fired. My stomach seemed to explode, as if someone had poured a pot of boiling soup all over me, and the world went hazy. There were some shots, a rapid volley, but I have no idea where this came from. They seemed to be all around me. I vaguely remember being on my hands and knees on the ground, disoriented, with everything spinning. I also had the sensation of being moved and propelled. After that, I remember nothing. Are we going to read chapter 24?
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and pick it up. I got it.
Okay.
Appreciate you. Yeah. And real quick, you apologized yesterday for not being able to read. It's all good. I'm glad you helped today. Like, you're doing great. Just wanted to tell you.
Hey, this
So,
is not this shit is not easy. I'm not gonna lie. Like reading out loud, makes me feel like I'm in class or something. But
word.
it's all
Oh,
good.
no, don't think about it like that. It's just have fun with it. And like, we're all getting political education through this. And like I said, you're doing great. So I appreciate you showing up today. For real. Black brother, think. Oh, I'm sorry. This is a quote from Ray Garfield Dandridge, Time to Die. Black brother, think your life is so sweet that you would live at any price? Does mere existence balance with the weight of your great sacrifice? Or can it be you fear the grave, enough to live and die a slave? Oh, brother, be it better said. When you are gone and tears are shed, that your death was the stepping stone, your children's crossed upon. Men have died that men might live. Look every foeman in the eye. If necessary, your life give. For something ere in vain you die. Again, that was a quote from Ray Garfield Dandridge, Time to Die. The section is called Aftermath. Long after I was shot, I hovered between consciousness and unconsciousness. I remember some things and have no memory of others. It was a terrifying time. The blood was pounding in my head, waves of pain engulfed me, and everything around me receded into a vast blur. I lost all sense of minutes and hours. The next thing I recall is arriving at the entrance to Kaiser's Hospital, which is about 5 miles from the scene of the shooting. I have no idea how I got there. I remember a platform at the entrance about the height of my waist. It seemed to have no steps leading up to it, and I wondered how I would get up on it. Although I was in excruciating pain, I managed to roll onto the platform. Then I rose and somehow staggered into the hospital where I asked for a doctor. I do not remember the person I spoke to, but whoever it was would not call a doctor and kept mentioning the police. The time seemed endless, and I grew weaker and weaker. Someone finally helped me into a room and put me on a gurney, and the doctor came at last. As he began to examine the wound in my stomach, the police burst in. Although I was in terrific pain and completely helpless, they grabbed my hands and stretched them above my head, handcuffing them to the gurney on both sides. This pulled and stretched my stomach, causing real agony. Then they began to beat on my handcuffs, already too tight, and cutting into my flesh. For more than a few years after, I had a pinched nerve, where they pounded the steel into my wrist. Before long, the pain in my arms were more intense than the pain in my stomach. It was more than I could stand, and I screamed, begging a doctor who was watching this to make the police loosen the cuffs. He told me to shut up. There was also a black nurse in the room, and she became very upset, but there was nothing she could do. The police were all around me, hitting me at my face and head and calling me names. They said I had killed one policeman, John Frey, and had wounded another, Hubert Hines, and that my life was no longer worth anything. You're going to die for this, they promised. If you don't die in the gas chamber, then when you're sent to prison, we'll have you killed there. And if you're acquitted, we'll kill you in the streets. Some of the police spat on me, and I spat back, getting rid of some of the mucus and blood in my throat. Each time they came at me, I spat blood in their faces and over their uniforms. Finally, the doctor put a towel over my mouth, and the police continued their attacks. I was still screaming in pain when I passed out completely. I regained consciousness in Highland Alameda County Hospital in East Oakland, having been moved there because I was not a member of the Kaiser Health Plan. My wound had been treated, and I was in bed with the penile catheter and tubes running into my nose and abdominal area. Machines arranged around the bed, removed the excess fluids and mucus from the tubes. The police had awakened me. Whenever I fell asleep, they would wake me up again. I was so heavily drugged for the first few days, it is difficult to remember everything that went on. When I first regained consciousness, I seemed to remember thinking about my situation and wondering if it was hopeless. My fear was not of death itself, but a death without meaning. Amen. I wanted my death to be something the people could relate to, a basis for further mobilization of the community. I remember a radio playing in the room and the announcer saying something about a song dedicated to the Minister of Defense. However, I was not sure I had really heard it. Perhaps it was my imagination. At that point, a nurse came into the room and seeing I was awake, asked if I had heard the song dedicated to me. Then I knew that my situation was not hopeless and that the people were relating to the incident, wherever it was. This gave me much comfort at that time, even though I was in the hands of my oppressors. I knew that the establishment would do everything in its power to destroy me, but this small sign of community response helped me to begin the deal with the police in my room. During the time this was happening, I kept waking up and drifting back to sleep. I soon discovered that my feet were shackled, the chains connecting one ankle to the other, with both fastened to the bed. It was a strange feeling to wake up and find your feet in chains. At first, I wondered if I was having a nightmare, but then I remembered the officer drawing his service revolver and the scene at the Kaiser Hospital, and I decided it was no dream. I really was shackled, and police were there guarding me. They meant to kill me, as they had long wanted to, and as officers who shot me had attempted to. Under the circumstances, my survival was a miracle. Shortly after the incident, I received a letter from a physician, Dr. Aguilar, which was printed in the Black Panther newspaper. It read, I can remember nothing in my medical training which suggested that, in the care of an acute abdominal injury, severe pain and hemorrhage are best treated by manacling the patient to the examining table in such a way that the back is arched and belly tensed. Yet this is precisely the picture of current emergency room procedure which appeared on the front page of a local newspaper last weekend. Looming large in the foreground of the same picture, so large as to suggest a caricature, was a police officer. Could it have been he who distracted the doctor in charge of the case to position a patient in this curious way? Unusual as it was, the picture probably did not disrupt very much the pleasant weekend enjoyed by my neighbors, nor disturb more than momentarily the consciousness of my medical colleagues. To me, upon whose mind's eye it is predominantly engraved, this photograph is a pretentious document of modern history. It represents an end and beginning. Further, for me, there has been enough of listening, of reading, of pondering. The time now has come to speak, to act, to fight back. I have read essays written about the patient Huey P. Newton. I have heard him patiently and painstakingly articulate his ideas and his hopes to a parade of questioners. Hour after hour, he continues to address the convinced and the unconvinced alike without malice. I listened to him paraphrasing the concepts set forth in Dr. Fanon's books in a dozen brilliantly succinct sentences. I listened to him and marveled that a young man of 25 years can interpret in such scholarly fashion the historic, socioeconomic, and political implications of the trend of modern society, while I, on the other hand, after 45 years, 17 of them spent in study at college and in postdoctoral education, learned little of human value and must begin again. The beginning again for me dates from the last time I saw the patient several weeks ago, in a discussion with a group of people, many of whom came by, listened a while, and left. One such young man called later in the evening to say that he was in jail. He had been detained by the police for what they suspected might be a minor infraction of the motor vehicle code, mistakenly, as it turned out, for they quickly determined that no law had been broken. Not content, the police undertook lengthy investigation, which ultimately revealed that the young man had not satisfactorily replied to the charge of driving with an invalid license 1 year ago. For this reason, he was now jailed with the bail set at $500 and $550. It took 3 hours to fill out the requisition form, pay the requisite fees, and see the requisite people in order to extricate this black boy from his cell. 2 days later, I was driving with a friend on the highway when she was apprehended because of 4 concurrent infractions of the motor vehicle code, including driving without a valid permit for the trailer we were pulling. Nothing happened in spite of the fact that we were detained momentarily some miles farther on for still another infraction, this time a moving violation. We still arrived home in time for dinner. 2 white ladies in their comfortable white neighborhood. My friend told me later her total bail for all of this lawlessness came to $15. So please do not waste my time, my white brothers and sisters, in telling me that justice is dispensed equally under the law to all Americans. I will not believe you. I apologize, Mr. Newton, for any aggravation of suffering inflicted upon you during the course of treatment of your injuries. I apologize for the subhuman conditions and horrors of the ghetto in which an immoral political and social system makes it inevitable that men like you are gunned down in the streets for your own town. Mary Jane Aguilar, MD. That was the quote. All that I read was from that doctor. All the time I was in the hospital, the police did their best to exhaust me. Every time I dropped off, they kicked the bed or shook me. One of them held a sawed-off shotgun up to my face, warning me that it was going to go off accidentally. Another showed me a razor blade and threatened to cut the tubes and let me suffocate. One of them predicted I would commit suicide by pulling the tubes out of my nose. Sometimes they even moved the tubes. They told me I was going to burn. They repeated their threat that I would be gassed in the little green chamber at San Quentin if I escaped. They said they would have me killed. They even took bets among themselves on whether I would get the gas chamber or life in prison. They made remarks like, "This nigga's going to die. He's done for now. He's going to die in the gas chamber." I never replied, but I did complain to the nurses about the abuse. The supervisor of nurses paid a visit, smiled at the police apologetically, and asked them if they were bothering me. "Oh, no, of course not," they said, smiling back. When she left, the harassment started again. They even prevented a black nurse from treating me. White nurses came and went at will, but when a black nurse tried to take my blood pressure, the police grabbed her, and she ran terrified from the room. Then the supervisor came back. "Now you know she works here," she said. "You shouldn't bother her like that." This cruel game went on until my family, who could scarcely afford it, hired private nurses to be with me all the time. Things improved then, because the nurses watched the police and made them leave me alone. For the moment my family heard about the incident, they did everything to help me. They had rushed to Kaiser Hospital and stayed close by me while I underwent surgery. Then at Highland Hospital, they hired private nurses to protect me from the police abuse. My brother Melvin and my sister Leola, with Eldridge Cleaver and Ill, and other Black Panthers, began the arrangements for my legal defense. They knew it was going to be difficult since the police were determined to have me convicted and ruin the party. To the police, it was a golden opportunity. Bobby was in jail, and they had what looked at to be an open and shut case against me. The efforts of my family to get me the best legal help soon brought encouraging results. One afternoon, after I had been in Highland Hospital a few days, I heard a commotion outside my door. The police were trying to keep out someone, a woman, who was determined to come in, and she was raising all kinds of hell. It was Beverly Axelrod, the lawyer who had done so much to get Eldridge Cleaver ill out of prison, and with her was a black attorney. Because I was still so weak, Beverly did not stay long that day, just long enough to assure me that every effort was being made to find the best lawyer to fight my case. Beverly felt it was too big and difficult a case for her, but I sensed in her someone who would stand by me, no matter what the cost. Beverly has never betrayed that confidence. Most of the time, I have never thought of her as a white person. Politically, she is left wing, but more important, she is a generous and open human being, capable of growth and change. I've known her now for many years, and often in the past, I had discovered while talking to her that she has certain unconscious racist ways of looking at things. Whenever this was pointed out to her, she would examine her attitudes and deal with them in ways that changed her life. It was this ability to change that convinced me she was genuine and could be trusted. So when she spoke of the lawyer Charles Gary during the first visit, I knew I could have confidence in her opinion of him. Beverly had met Gary in the early 1950s when she was a parole officer. She had become a protege of his. He had given her cases and helped her to establish a law practice. Isaac, if you still want to, I'm going to read this page and you can start on the next one. No pressure though.
No, we could do that. Good.
Cool. She told me that Charles Gary had a long history of defending the politically, racially, and socially depressed. His concern for social justice came from his father, who had fled Armenia after the 1896 massacre and settled in Bridgeport, Massachusetts. There, I cannot say that state. There, he had been involved in the early labor movement and led a strike against a factory paying low wages to workers. The family moved to San Francisco in 1915, and Charles put himself through law school, specializing in labor law after graduation. In the early days of his practice, when labor unions did not have the respectability they later enjoyed, he represented 16 unions. Over the years, he became more and more involved in political cases, defending dissenters and activists in unpopular but important cases. He developed a strong sense of commitment to the underprivileged and those whose rights were not fully protected. Because the political dissenter, the accused criminal, and the early trade union organizer were looked upon as social outcasts, Gary maintained that they were most in need of justice and should have the best legal talent. Gary had a reputation as a brilliant trial lawyer with a remarkable gift for cross-examining witnesses and an acute understanding of the jury's importance in political cases. He believed that in political trials, a defense lawyer must try to select a jury that is not so much concerned with law and order as with basic principle, the moral principle of law. During World War II, Gary had insisted on serving as a combat infantryman, although he was an obvious candidate for a commission in the Judge Advocates Corps. He made this choice because of his strong opposition to fascism. He wanted to be totally involved in helping defeat it. Charles Gary was obviously an extraordinary man. The same day that Beverly came to see me, John George, a black attorney who had previously handled a number of cases for me, arrived at the hospital. The police barred him from my room. It was typical of their racism. A white lawyer could demand to see me and get in, but a black lawyer was chased away. Regardless of position or education, color was all that mattered. Soon after, however, John did manage to get in and brought Beverly with him. He felt, as she did, that an explosive case like mine required someone with more experience than he had, someone with a large office staff and the necessary investigative and research facilities.
In between these visits, the police talked loudly about Beverly and John. They hated Beverly Axelrod passionately because she had gotten Eldridge out. That I'm gonna just keep with you going ill when we hear Eldridge out of the I don't know how to say that word. Penitentiary. Sorry. The fact that she
No,
was
you're
white
right.
the fact that she was white only made her more culpable. I think they viciously ridiculed her and mocked John George, making fun of his physical characteristics. All through this, I lay shackled to the bed, half drugged and in pain, while they swaggered about their guns, waiting for visitors to leave the room, then threatening to kill me. Other people visited. I remember nothing distinctly about the first week or so, but I know that my family came regularly, and I remember seeing my brothers and sisters in the room from time to time. My mother was terribly upset by the whole experience and could not bring herself to come to the hospital. It was almost impossible for people who were not relatives or lawyers to get in to see me. Yet waking up one day, I became aware of a complete stranger in my room, a black man, neither a lawyer nor a relative. He was probably a police agent trying to lure me into a damaging statement. But when but he went about his task in such a clumsy, transparent way that he got nowhere. I knew he could not have entered the room without an assignment to investigate the case for the police, so I let him do the talking. Finally, Charles Gary came to visit me. Uh, Before Beverly mentioned his name, I had never heard of him, but my respects and trust for her transferred to him. The party and my family had decided to put the whole matter into his hands from a legal point of view. I was only half conscious, and Gary showed deep concern for my pain. That first day, we did not discuss strategy. Gary said simply that he had admired my stand and would be proud to represent me. I returned with the compliment. As I lay recovering from my wounds, I tried to assess my position, to think of the immediate emergencies and also its larger meaning and significance. No doubt about it, I was in serious trouble. I was fully under the control of my oppressors and was with ma- charged with a major crime that could carry to the death penalty. As a matter of fact, I expected to die. At no time before the trial did I expect to escape with my life. Yet, being executed in the gas chamber did not necessarily mean defeat. It could be one more step to bringing the community to a higher level of consciousness. I was not trying to be heroic, but I had been preparing myself for death over a long period of time. When the party was first organized, I did not think I would live more than 1 year after we began. I thought we would be blasted off the streets, but I had hoped that 1 year to launch the party and in any additional time was just a bonus. When I had landed in Highland Hospital, I was already living on borrowed time. More had been accomplished in the year that Bobby and I had dreamed of when we drew up our 10-point program in the North Oakland Service Center. Despite my legal predicament and the prospect of death, I was not discouraged or unhappy. There would be time to make a few more political statements and to make my ordeal a part of black consciousness. That this was important for more than 350 years. Men in this country had been dying with courage and dignity for causes they believed in. This aspect of our history has always been known to black people, but for many the knowledge has been vague. We knew the names of a few of our martyrs and heroes, but often we're not acquainted with the circumstances or precise context of their lives. White America has seen it that black history has been suppressed in schools and in American history books. The bravery of hundreds of our ancestors who took part in slave rebellions has been lost in the midst of time, since plantation owners did their best to prevent any written accounts of uprising. Millions of black school children never learned about two great black heroes in the 19th century, Vesey and Nat the Prophet Turner, who died for freedom. White people had good reason to destroy our history. Black men and women who refuse to live under the oppression and are dangerous to white society because they become symbols of hope to their brothers and sisters, inspiring them to follow their example. In our time, Malcolm X, who, if y'all ain't acquainted with Malcolm X, please get acquainted, is the supreme example. His life and accomplishments galvanized a generation of young black people. He helped us take a great stride forward with a new sense of ourselves and our destiny. But meaningful as his life was, death had great significance too. A new militant spirit was born when Malcolm X died. It
I'll
was
go ahead and
born
take
of.
it from here, Isaac.
Okay, yeah.
It was born of outrage and a unified black consciousness out of the sense of a task left undone. In light of this, I was able to stand back a little and consider my own death. The Black Panther Party had been formed in the spirit of Malcolm. We strove for the goals he had set for himself. When Black people saw Black Panthers being killed, not only by the police, but also by the judicial system, they would feel the circle closing around them and take another step forward. In this sense, my death would not be meaningless. After 15 days in Highland Alameda Hospital, my condition improved, and I was transferred to the medical unit on death row in San Quentin. Officially, I was there for my own protection. When the ambulance neared Quentin, the police told me to take a good look at its walls because I was going to be inside them a long, long time. As one by one the guards called ahead, dead man, dead man, dead man. No prisoner is allowed to talk to a man bound for death row. The hospital tank at Quinton is right next door to the psychotic ward. While my cell was well secured, it had 3 locks. Most of the psychotic cells were left open because those inmates became restless in a small space. Out in the hall, there were things to keep them occupied: weightlifting equipment, a card table and chairs, some games. One of the mental cases was a Chicano named, I think, Robillard. Robillard and I hit it off because he identified with the Muslims, and so did I. All day, he would stand outside my cell playing his guitar and singing to me and saying, "Don't you worry now, everything's going to be all right." Yo, that's so fucking dope. Sorry, I just had to say that. That's solidarity right there. Love it. Robillard had been in and out of prison all his life. This time, the beef was murdering a former cellmate. Like me, he had defended himself and lost the case, but the death sentence had been overturned when Robillard was declared incompetent to defend himself. After that, he was brought to the Quentin psychotic ward and locked up. There, he tried to cut his wrist, so they left his cell open and made him a trustee. Robillard liked to see the doctors dress my wound, and when they came and removed the bandages, he would move from one end of the bed to the other and hover over the doctors, chattering with excitement. On my 3rd day at Quentin, a new man, a white, was placed in the cell next to me. Sorry. I just think it's funny how he didn't say white person, he just said a white, was placed in the cell next to mine. We never learned his name, but we knew he was scheduled for release in 6 months. All that day, Robillard sang to me, and when night came, he slipped into the new man's cell and slit his throat and smashed his skull with the weightlifting dumbbell. I know that's fucking right. Then he went back to his cell, his own cell, and sang over and over, "Hang down your head, Tom Dooley. Hang down your head and cry. Hang down your head, Tom Dooley. Poor boy, you're bound to die." He was still singing when I fell asleep about 10. Although it happened right next door, I never knew, and neither did anybody else, until the guards found the new man dead in his bunk the next morning. Robillard was finally declared incurably insane. It was his 7th murder, his 4th in prison. All the other prison murders had been cellmates. After 2 weeks in San Quentin, I was well enough to leave. They had carried me in, but I walked out. And from Quentin, they took me to Alameda County Jail in downtown Oakland, where I had been before. This time, I was to stay there 11 months before and during my trial. I'm going to knock out one more chapter if you're down, Isaac. Again, no pressure, bro. Feel
Yeah,
free
no,
to do
I'm
too
down.
much.
This is
Cool. So
good.
I'm going to start off on this one and then, I'm going to lay it up to you. All right. So this is 25. This quote is from George Jackson, Blood in My Eye. The hypocrisy of American fascism forces it to conceal its attacks on political offenders by the legal fiction of conspiracy laws and highly sophisticated frame-ups. The masses must be taught to understand the true function of prisons. Why do they exist in such numbers? What is the real underlying economic motive of crime and the official definition of types of offenders or victims? The people must learn that when one offends, in quotes, the totalitarian state is a patently not an offensive, I'm sorry, it is patently not an offense against the people of the state, but an assault upon the privilege of the privileged few. That's George Jackson, Blood in My Eye. Strategy. On November 12, 1967, the Alameda County Grand Jury returned on indictment against me. I was accused of 3 felonies: the murder of Patrolman John Fry, the assault of Patrolman Herbert Haynes with a deadly weapon, and the kidnapping of a black man named Del Ross near the scene of the crime, which included my forcing him to drive me in his car to another part of the city. This is supposedly how I got to Kaiser Hospital. Del Ross testified before the grand jury that I and another man had climbed into his car, pointed a gun at him, and told him to drive us to the hospital. But before we arrived at the hospital, he testified, we had jumped out of the car and disappeared into the night. Evidence presented to the grand jury included the bullet taken from Patrolman Fry's back, the bullet taken from Patrolman Haynes's knee, Haynes's revolver, 2 9mm cartridge cases that had been found in the street, 2 matchboxes containing marijuana found under the seat of the car I had been driving, various photographs of the cars at the scene, and a Xerox of the Kaiser Hospital records of my emergency treatment. Patrolman Haynes' gun was the only weapon found at the scene. The 9mm casings were not fired from it. In addition to this meager evidence, the grand jury heard the testimony of Haynes and Del Ross, the police officers who arrived at the scene after the shooting, the nurse who admitted me to Kaiser Hospital, and the ballistic experts. It was estimated that 7 shots I'm sorry, yeah, 7 shots had been fired on the morning of October 28th. Patrolman Haynes had received 3 wounds, and Fry had been shot twice in the thigh and back. A completely flattened slug, which had probably ricocheted off some other surface, was found in the door of Laverne's Volkswagen. The grand jury took evidence after I was removed from San Quentin to the county jail in Oakland. Although severely wounded only a few weeks earlier, I was recuperating rapidly and was strong enough to begin planning the political strategy for my trial. I did not want to deal with the legalities, just political strategy. The number one political decision made by the party was that the attorney stay out of all political decisions concerning the trial. I needed to know the legal ramification of any move, of course, and I would not question them, but legal niceties were definitely secondary. The ideological and political significance of the trial was of primary importance. By political strategy, I mean this. I wanted to use the trial as a political forum to prove that having to fight for my life was the logical and inevitable outcome of our efforts to lift the oppressor's burden. The Black Panthers' activities and programs, the patrolling of the police, and the resistance to their brutality had disturbed the power structure. Now it was gathering its forces to crush our revolution forever. Politician was assured. Why not use the courtroom and the media to educate our people? To us, the key point in the trial was police brutality. But we hoped to do more than articulate that. We also wanted to show that the other kinds of violence poor people suffer, unemployment, poor housing, inferior education, lack of public facilities, the inequality of the draft, were part of the same fabric. If we could organize people against police brutality, as we have begun to do, we might move them toward eliminating related forms of oppression. The system, in fact, destroys us through neglect much more often than by the police revolver. The gun is only the coup de grace, the enforcer. To wipe out the conditions leading up to the coup de grace, that was our goal. I might be saying that wrong. The gun, I'll read this page and you can take over after this, Isaac. The gun and the murder it represented would then fade away. Thus, for the Black Panther Party, the goal of the trial was not primarily to save my life, but to organize the people and advance their struggle. Our goal was not to save my life because I had accepted what I thought was a certain fate. They would kill me. Everything we did in the next 11 months was predicated on my death. My life had to come to an end sometime, but the people go on. In them lies the possibility of immortality. The dialect teaches that all men long for immortality, and this longing is one of the contradictions between man and nature. Man tries to resolve the certainty of death through reversal by bringing it under control, which is a form of the will to power. But since each man eventually gives up his life, death can be controlled only through the ongoing life of the people. Because I saw my death growing closer, I often wondered how I would prepare for it. A person never knows how he will act prior to the experience itself, knowing that the most valuable thing anyone has is his life. I could not be sure in what way I would give it up, particularly under the threat of the gas chamber. I had faced death before, but under different circumstances. There had been a spontaneity and a suddenness in each confrontation, and the possibility of outwitting death. But when the state kills you, there are no odds. The inevitability of death is absolute. To face execution by the state demands a special kind of courage, the ability to act with grace and dignity in a totally degrading situation. It is the ultimate form of truth. The first defense strategy that Charles Gary decided upon was a series of pretrial motions in state and federal courts questioning the validity of grand juries to prove that my indictment was both illegal and unjust. Gary not only presented arguments against the composition of grand juries, which rarely represents a cross-section of the community, but also maintained that the system itself is unconstitutional. An indictment by a grand jury, he argued, imperils the right to a fair trial. In a grand jury hearing, which is always held in secret, the defendant and his lawyer are not present. Evidence against the accused is presented to the jury by the district attorney, but no cross-examination is allowed, and no evidence can be introduced by the defendant. While it is true that grand jury testimony is inadmissible at trials, the fact that the transcript of a grand jury hearing can be published by the press offers little chance of public impartiality towards the accused. You can go ahead, Isaac, please.
Yeah. Public opinion can be greatly influenced by these transcripts, especially since all evidence and testimony are presented at the discretion of the district attorney, who is out to prove the defendant's guilt. So it hardly seems fair that a trial jury can then be selected from citizens who have heard or who have heard of or read the evidence that was responsible for the indictment. After all, an indictment means only that the grand jury felt that there was enough evidence of guilt to bring the accused to trial. Gary also argued that in asking for a grand jury hearing in my case, the prosecutor was doing something unusual and prejudiced. Alameda County statistics show that only 3% of all cases go before grand juries. The rest are heard in what are known as informations, where both sides argue before a judge, who then has the sole decision for calling a trial. In an information, witnesses can be cross-examined, and a procedure not allowed in grand jury hearings. In my case, the prosecutor clearly wanted testimony presented to a grand jury in order to influence public opinion against me. Gary also criticized the whole process of grand jury selection. In California, each of the 20 superior court judges recommended three persons as grand juries. These nominees are supposed to be known to the judge personally. Obviously, few judges in Alameda County would be acquainted with many of the 200,000 black people who live there. As a matter of fact, the only black person who sat on my grand jury was absent on the day of evidence was presented. Judges tend to choose white upper middle class citizens, businessmen, conservative housewives, brokers, bankers, retired army officers, and so forth, who are for the most part middle aged and without the faintest understanding of the lives of poor black people. Most of them in fact are hostile to blacks. However, then are they qualified? How then are they qualified to have any insight into the events or attitudes that bring such defendants before them? One of Gary's presentations concerned the physical movements of the grand jury. After examining the official court transcripts of my hearing, Gary proved that the grand jury could not possibly have considered or discussed any of the evidence presented to them. He did a very thorough job of analyzing the minute by minute movements of the jurors on the final day of deliberation. The result was astonishing. The time sequence of the jury's movements that day, as recorded in the official transcript, proves that there could not have been any discussion or deliberation about my case. After all this evidence had been presented, has been presented, the members of the grand jury went into the room where they were supposed to consider the evidence and shut the door. Almost immediately, they came out. Since the evidence concerning my guilt was non-existent, not one person had testified that I carried or fired a gun. Their failure to spend any time weighing the issue is incredible. In exposing their indifference and fraudulence, Gary strongly reinforced his contention that grand juries are insensitive to the problem of the poor and the oppressed. After filing briefs that questioned the constitutionally, I can't.
Constitutionality.
Yeah, of the grand jury system. Gary turned to the inequities of in the trial system itself. He and his staff did research on how jurors are chosen to serve. Alameda County, like most of the country, selects its jurors from the county's voter registration list, and there, as elsewhere, the number of registered voters from black communities is far smaller than those from the white population. Furthermore, if selected for jury duty, many black people have legitimate reasons for declining. Economic hardship and inconvenience are involved. Because of this, few members of minority groups are available to decide the fate of their peers. Again, Gary raised the question of whether, under these circumstances, a black man can receive a fair trial in America. From November until the following July, when my trial began, Gary was busy and overworked filing these motions in the California courts. 9 months is an exceptionally long time between indictment and trial. The delay in my case was not only inevitable because of the time-consuming pre-trial hearings, but desirable. The media had made me a celebrity through television and hysterical newspaper accounts. The death of a policeman always incites a large percentage of the population to cry vengeance. Many people believed that I was guilty. Then, too, the Oakland police were in a state of frenzy. On October 17th, less than 2 weeks before the Frey shooting, they had once again demonstrated their brutality at a protest rally of 4,000 demonstrators in Oakland. That day, they attacked the demonstrators so viciously and with so little provocation that the entire media, even William Nolan's Tribune, criticized their behavior.
I
The
got you.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate you though, for real. The day became known as Bloody Tuesday. As a result, the police were very much on the defensive and anxious to vindicate themselves. To this, they had to keep demonstrating how threatened they were, particularly by the Black Panthers. Their attacks on the brothers increased. At one point, David Hillard was arrested on the street for handing out leaflets about my case. As far as I know, leafletting has never been against the law. At any rate, Gary wanted emotions to subside to improve my chances for a more objective trial. While the police were stepping up their harassment of the Black Panthers, other people in the Oakland area were rallying to help me. The party decided that a broad base of support would be necessary in order to win allies and raise funds for my defense. So in December, the Black Panther Party announced a coalition with the Peace and Freedom Party. This organization was made up mostly of young whites who opposed the war in Vietnam and who also felt that the two-party system was no longer working. They saw a need for a third party that could run strong anti-war leaders in the 1968 national election, as well as combat the evils in our society. Ultimately, when the Peace and Freedom Party became a legal party in most states, Eldridge, was its candidate for president. God damn, everybody just fucking up. Along with Jerry Rubin for vice president. But mainly, the alliance between the Black Panthers and the Peace and Freedom Party was meant to demonstrate that racism and police oppression were responsible for my being in jail, and that I was falsely accused of the murder of Patrolman Fry. The phrase "Free Huey" was created out of this coalition. It became a rallying cry for people who believed in my innocence. Meanwhile, all across the country, Black people were relating to my imprisonment. The Black Panthers were recruiting members in every major city and also in some of the rural areas. In some cases, people just formed a group and called themselves Black Panthers without even getting in touch with the central headquarters. Sometimes, groups would form around our 10-point program and use another name. It was all the same. The community was becoming educated. Their consciousness was being raised. We were also gaining international attention. Soon, groups in other countries began to ask us to send speakers. At that time, we still considered ourselves revolutionary nationalists, that is, Black nationalists who took a revolutionary position in the United States. We had not as yet developed an international policy, but some Black Panthers made trips out of the United States to explain our position and describe the nature of American oppression. One of these trips was to Japan, where a group of revolutionary Japanese students, I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher this name, I apologize, Zen Gakuren. It's Zengaquren. I'm spelling it because people be in my inbox telling me how to pronounce words correctly, which I appreciate. Invited the Black Panthers to speak at a number of conferences organized by left-wing students. We choose Kathleen Cleaver, whom Eldridge had recently married, and Earl Anthony, a Black Panther, to make the trip. Earl was a Panther Party member from Los Angeles with a college degree. Even though the Los Angeles chapter had some problems with him, he was considered competent and articulate enough to speak for the party. However, in Hawaii, both Kathleen and Earl experienced some delay in getting their visas cleared by the Japanese consulate. Kathleen decided to return to California, and Earl went on by himself. When Anthony got to Japan, everything went wrong. Instead of stating the party's position, he presented a personal platform, a strictly white and Black line, about how the Black world would fight the white world and that would be the end of it. His whole talk was just that simple, the same line Stokely Carmichael was following. He showed no awareness of class issues and did not even try to describe them in terms of this country. To him, the whole problem was a matter of racism, which cried out for separatism. I heard a tape recording of some of the Japanese sessions. A friend brought it to me, and I was angered. The Japanese students put Anthony down left and right. They asked good questions, questions that dealt with contradictions in a dialectical way, whereas Anthony was dealing in absolutes. For him, all meaning lay in the white world's oppression of Blacks. Certainly, this is much of the problem, but it fits into a larger context. Ironically, it was the Japanese students who stated the party's actual position by pointing out other reasons and circumstances that complicate the Black-white situation. Anthony betrayed the purpose of his visit by going on a solo trip and narrowing the possibilities of international solidarity. No wonder the Japanese students were disillusioned with the party. To this day, I do not know whether Kathleen Cleaver had anything to do with Anthony's confusion. She has always been kind of a cultist in her Black nationalism, so she may have influenced him. I have to stop right here because in the previous chapter named Eldridge, Huey was so hesitant on, well, not even hesitant. He didn't even bring up the rapes. And he read the books where Eldridge talks about them in detail. He didn't bring any of that up. Matter of fact, he tried his best at first to paint him in a good light, but then contradicted himself later on in that chapter, saying, well, he really ain't do shit. And he wasn't about shit. But he's still a good like it was, but here he's so hard on Kathleen, who was a literal victim of Eldridge. They heard her screams when he punched her in the face over and over. They heard her screams when he would rape her over and over as punishment. They all knew what was going on. So it's very interesting the way he chooses to describe her. I just had to say that. I
Yeah,
do not know whether.
We all know why Eldridge went alone though, right? Like we just put two and two together. This man is a rapist. This man will do it, and with a rapist, there's no color spectrum in it. He legit inflicted fear into black women, like no doubt about that. I just need to put that in there.
For real. To this day, I do not know whether Kathleen Cleaver had anything to do with Anthony's confusion. She has always been a kind of cultist in her black nationalism, so she may have influenced him. Kathleen really loved the party, but I doubt that either she or Eldridge ever completely accepted our ideology. Anyway, when we heard the tapes, we were disgusted. The Central Committee insured Anthony and relieved him of all duties dealing with sensitive issues. He went back to Los Angeles and worked with the party for a while, but eventually dropped out and wrote a shallow and opportunistic book about the party. For this, he was expelled. At the time, we needed writers to help our cause, not people on ego trips. But we can settle for a rapist. Incidents like this are depressing when you are unable to deal with them directly. At the time, since I was a victim of police frame-up, it was probably best that I remain in prison. In this way, my incarceration was a continual reminder to the outside world of the outrageous tactics of the police. Every day they kept me there, I grew as a symbol of the brutalization of the poor and Black, as well as a living reproach to society's indifference to the inequalities of the legal system. Free Huey became a powerful slogan, and the words went far beyond me to become a cry for liberation for all Black people. But the 11 months I spent at the Alameda County Courthouse waiting for trial was not easy. The prison routine was deadly, the food bad, the guards corrupt. Most of my stay was spent in solitary because I had protested the ways prisoners were treated. My cell was 4.5 feet by 6 feet, with no window in it, not even in the door. Eventually, they did cut out a small hole in the door and covered it with the thick wire. It was so swelteringly hot that I often took off all my clothes to get relief. Even breathing was hard work, since there was no ventilation in the cell. A bunk, a wash basin, and a toilet were there, nothing more. I got out only 3 afternoons a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. When my family came or when I saw lawyers, even visiting was unpleasant. The visiting rooms were tiny cubicles with a steel wall between prisoners and visitors. You had to talk through a round, screened hole and put your ear to another hole to hear the reply. Usually, the babble from other visitors and prisoners made conversation strained. Fortunately, I was able to send letters and tapes out with my lawyers to friends and the party. The tapes were made in the attorney's room. I was never actually out of touch and never tempted to give up, largely because of the strong support I had, not only from the people, but also from Charles Gary and the attorneys who were working with him on my case. These were Alexander Hoffman, a lawyer active in civil rights cases in the Bay Area, Faye Stenter, who was later to be involved in George Jackson's case at Soledad and thereafter, John Beto, a Chicana lawyer, and Carlton Ennis, a Black lawyer. Later, attorney Edward Keating, the founder of Ramparts magazine, joined the others. The brothers on the outside worked unceasingly for my defense. They went into Black communities in the Bay Area collecting money. They moved into college campuses and talked to students. They spoke and held forums and organized rallies. When Bobby Seale got out of jail in December, he had been released before his 6 months were up. He worked full-time organizing for my defense. The police never let up on him either. One night in February, they busted into his apartment and arrested him for having a weapon, which they had planted there. It was such an obvious frame-up that the judge let him off. On February 17th, my birthday, and the next day, 2 huge rallies were held, one in Oakland and one in Los Angeles. Many leaders of the Black Revolutionary Movement in the United States spoke at them, including H. Rap Brown, then chairman of SNCC, and James Foreman, then head of SNCC's New York office. Among them, also, was Stokely Carmichael, who came to the jail to see me. He had just returned from a trip around the world, to Africa, Cuba, and Vietnam, and a lot of his ideas had changed in a short time. Our visit lasted just long enough for us to disagree. Stokely began by telling me what it would take to get me out of jail. The only thing that would do it, he said, was armed rebellion, culminating in a race war. I disagreed with him. While I acknowledged the pervasiveness of racism, the larger problem should be seen in terms of class exploitation in the capitalist system. In analyzing what was happening in the country, I said that we would have to accept many alliances and form solidarity with any people fighting the common oppressor. He objected to the Black Panther alliance with the Peace and Freedom Party and said we should not associate with white radicals or let them come to our meetings or be involved in our rallies. Stokely warned that whites would destroy the movement, alienate Black people, and lessen our effectiveness in the community. Later, he proved right in terms of what happened to the party, although he was wrong in principle. As a result of coalitions, the Black Panthers were brought into the free speech movements, the psychedelic fad, and the advocacy of drugs, which we were and are dead set against. All right, Huey. All these causes were irrelevant to our work, which was concerned with deeper and more fundamental issues, in fact, survival. When these things happened, Stokely warned whites would try to take the leadership from us. I did not believe him while he was running these things down to me. We were not into a racist bag, I told him, and these developments were not inevitable. At the time, I felt sure that Stokely was afraid of himself and his own weaknesses. I responded to his racist analysis with a class analysis. He would have solidarity and friendship in a common struggle against a common oppressor without the whites taking over. But in the 33 months I spent in jail, our leadership did falter, and serious frictions developed between the Black Panthers and white radicals. Not until I got out of jail nearly 3 years later were we able to start putting everything together again. One of my most unhappy moments during the period, I was awaiting trial when I learned of little Bobby Hutton's murder on April 6, 1968. News of the shootout came over the prison radio. I was shocked, but not surprised. The police claimed little Bobby was shot trying to escape, but we knew that for the same lie told by Southern sheriffs for years. Black people were not fooled either. A terrible frustration and rage arose in the community. Little Bobby was murdered only 2 days after Martin Luther King's assassination, and the people were still staggering under that blow. After King's death, Police Chief Gaines had canceled all police leaves and doubled the number of occupying troops in our community, which only intensified the sense of anger and despair. With Bobby's murder, tension mounted in Oakland, along with the fear that the Black community would riot. On the morning of April 7th, Charles Gary and Bobby Seale came to see me. Eldridge, disgusting, had been arrested after the shooting, and Gary was going to defend him. He and Bobby were on their way that morning to a press conference at the police station, and they wanted a message for the people. I gave them a tape I made, urging the people not to riot spontaneously. This would only give the police an opportunity to continue the massacre. The people should arm themselves for protection when the police moved in to brutalize them, but not make themselves targets for a defenseless slaughter. Charles Gary delivered my message at the press conference and also made a statement to the media about the deliberate murder of little Bobby by the police. Of course, Police Chief Gaines exploded at that and accused Gary on radio and television of intemperate, I don't know how to say that word, sorry, and false statements. However, a former member of the Oakland Police Department, a Black man, recently confirmed to us in private that little Bobby was murdered outright. He had witnessed the murder that night. Bobby's death really tore me up. I became even more determined to use my trial as an organizing point against these murders. Meanwhile, Charles Gary was persevering in his motions to challenge the jury selection system. As a matter of fact, his efforts continued right up until the day my trial began. His investigations had a profound effect on the whole judicial system, and their repercussions can be seen all over the country today. It is largely because of Gary's work that courts all over the country have become aware of a defendant's right to be tried by the jury of his peers. But in the summer of 1968, he was still fighting for the right as the date of my trial came nearer and nearer. So we're going to stop there on part 5. And yeah, that's revolutionary suicide. I know people probably want to have a discussion and are not comfortable doing so in a recorded space. I'll be wanting to talk my whole shit and I'm about to go smooth the fuck off. So what I'll do, or if any of y'all do open up a space, let me know and I can put it in the Jumbotron, or I can just schedule a space right quick. It's totally up to y'all. But I do encourage y'all to like talk about this and make this political education space a community thing where we can discuss these things and these ideas and expand upon them. That's what we should use each other for. We definitely have the intellect to do so. And also to make it relevant to today. because we have a lot of examples, y'all, all over the world. The uprisings going on in West Africa. We have George in the space right now who's leading movements in Ghana and Accra, and we should be talking about these things and what's going on, and especially what's going on in Philly with the acquittal of that fucking pig that murdered that brother out there, and the people rioting, and the police on the scanner that got recorded literally saying, oh good, since he got acquitted we have a chance to bust some kids heads, and then had viral videos of them literally beating on these children. Lululemon is not that goddamn important. No one cares about those fucking housewife spandex like that. They just wanted a chance to exercise state repression against these kids and had fun doing it and did not care who pulled out their phones. We need to talk about these things because as conditions get worse, we need to be able to understand our material conditions and explain it to each other so that we can organize effectively and navigate these things, not only for like, our well-being mentally, but also spiritually, because I know y'all feel it. Shit, it was so hard for me to wake up this morning. I got like 2 hours of sleep because yesterday I was so exhausted because I had over 17 families call me with eviction notices. 17. And in cases they usually like take a couple weeks to get evicted, bro, they had until today. I had no way to help them but to spend like my own cash, which I'm not complaining about. But this way isn't sustainable. It's not sustainable. Like I'm one person, and those of us who are working out there, we're all just a few people. We need more. Plus, what's going on in New Orleans with the lack of drinking water? What are we going to do about that? We need to talk about these things. Our people need help. All we got is each other, and I mean, we can make something happen. So,
Let's
Isaac,
make
I don't know if you want to
it.
open up the space.
I was gonna say let's open up another space and like actually, go
All
through,
right, do that.
these
Do
topics.
that. So
Um,
Isaac will open up the space and y'all can join. And I'll keep sending y'all DMs. Also, too, like let me know if like me sending y'all the space in y'all DMs is rude. I don't know how this Twitter social media thing works, to be honest with you, but just communicate and I'll of course stop. Or I think Mr. JB explained to me you can turn on your notifications and then you can get the space. So that helps too. Cause I'm forgetful. Sometimes I'm a whole nerd. I be just wanting to read and I'll read into the void all day. But yeah, so Isaac's gonna have space. I encourage y'all to go and build on this for real. So I'm glad all y'all came and I hope y'all doing well and let's get free.